Welcome everyone who's just joining us. We'll go ahead and get started in just another minute or so. We'll let everybody finish logging on. So hang tight. We'll be with you in just a minute. All right, everybody, we'll go ahead and get started just to keep everything rolling for the sake of time. Welcome to Inside the Mind of a Peer Reviewer, a panel featuring peer reviewers from the Library Writing Cooperative's First Draft Matchmaker program. My name is Holly. I will be your host today, and you can go ahead and move forward. So our session logistics, we're here to hear from our panelists. So we'll be respectful of their time and put any questions in the chat. Approach today's session with an appreciation for learning. We're all coming from different places and different experiences in writing and publishing. If you have a resource to share with the group, please put that in the chat. We'll be sharing those along with the recording after the session. The session is being recorded and we will send a link to the recording after the session. We ask that you please remain muted during the session and feel free to leave your camera off. So our format for today's session is we'll have our introduction, which we're in the middle of, and then we'll go into some of the panelist insights. We'll ask them some targeted questions. The panelists will address some common questions that were asked during the registration process, and then we'll wrap it up for today. All right, so our presenters are Merinda Kaye Hensley, Elizabeth Price, and Katherine Pennavaria. So I've got just a short intro for each one of them. So Merinda Kaye Hensley is the Research Programs Liaison and Instruction Librarian at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Elizabeth Price is a business librarian and associate professor at James Madison University. And Katherine Pennavaria has been an academic librarian since 2000 and a writing teacher since 1985. She is currently the library director at a technical college in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and is the author of 3 books published by Rowman and Littlefield. So just a little bit about the Library Writing Cooperative, if you're not as familiar with us. We're a group of librarians who saw the need for more writing support for library workers of all kinds, independent of professional associations. And so we have Amanda Izenstark, who is helping with our technical things today. She is at the University of Rhode Island. And Agee, and I'm probably butchering your last name, I'm so sorry, is at San Jose State University.
You just muted.
You're muted, Holly.
I am here being host today, and Anna Sandelli is at the University of Tennessee Libraries, and she is helping with our chat today. So we have the First Draft Matchmaker program is our first program that we released. We have resources for authors and reviewers. And what we do is we pair together volunteer reviewers with authors who are looking to get feedback on their work. And in July, we offer National Article Writing Month, which offers weekly emails. We do weekly Zoom sessions where you can focus on your writing and general encouragement and opportunities for you to write optimistically an article, but really any kind of writing, book chapters, dissertations. We've had people working on all sorts of things. So that is coming up in July. If you want to participate this year, we do have some information out there, but if you want that information, I'm sure Anna's going to put that in the chat. And we're happy to take questions on that later. So I think that's enough about us for right now. Okay, so panelists, our first question is, what motivated you to be a peer reviewer? How did you get your start? And I'm gonna go ahead and we'll start with Merinda.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be here today. Thanks for taking the time. So what motivates me to be a peer reviewer? Well, the first thing really is to give back to the community, because when I was tenure track, I started in 2006. I had a team of librarians from all different areas of research working with me to better my research questions and to think about my methodology and to work on my writing. And so because I feel like I've gotten some good experience around that, I am just so happy to share what I've learned over the past 15 years, but also to keep up with the current research in the field. I love reading about what people are writing and what they're thinking about. And so I review for a couple of different journals in librarianship and one outside of librarianship. And also because I want to become a better researcher, writer, and editor myself. The peer review process forces me to stay within this process, and I enjoy it quite a bit. So I'm looking forward to sharing more of my experience with you today. I'll pass it over to the next person.
We'll move on to Elizabeth. We'll just kind of go in order of introductions for this first one. Thank you.
Sure, thanks for having me today. So I agree with a lot of what Merinda said, but I will also confess that part of the reason why I agreed was I kind of viewed it as undercover surveillance. I saw a call go out for the Journal of Business and Finance librarianship. And I thought, hey, if I can see what people are writing about and what's getting approved and those kind of things, then I will better be prepared to submit to this journal, which is kind of my dream journal. So I've been reviewing for them for 6 years. I still have not published in it. I'm still working up to that, but I've got a couple of ideas now. But that is kind of why I started doing it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Katherine?
Hi. I am motivated to be a peer reviewer because I know that writing effectively is a challenge. I'm not sure that anyone can really get to the point where they say, okay, now I can write really well. I don't need any more help. I just assume that everyone could use an experienced reviewer to help them along. And as Merinda said, I had people helping me when I went through the whole tenure process 20 years ago at Western Kentucky University. I guess I got my start as a peer reviewer when I was at WKU. I was on the editorial board for Kentucky Libraries, and I ended up helping a lot of my colleagues prepare their drafts for submission to that in different journals. So, and I've been a writing teacher. That was my first career. I started off as a college writing teacher. So I had a lot of insight into writing well. I think that the subject matter is, can vary, but there's always room for some evolution in writing strategies. So that's plus I just am kind of a teachery sort of person, and I just like to tell people what to do.
I love that. Thank you so much. I love that all of you, pretty much in the background had that, a lot of people helped me and I want to give back to others. And I think that we've seen that quite a bit in the First Draft Matchmaker program too. A lot of our reviewers say they're looking forward to giving back by reviewing. And I just think that that's so admirable. So thank you all for that answer. Our next question is what strategies do you use to provide peer review for publications? And Katherine, while I've still got you up, we'll just kind of go backwards this time. So I'll let you start.
I don't really have a master strategy. I like to look at what the individuals are trying to accomplish. So the more I know about what their goals are, what the journal is that they're hoping to, where they're submitting this to, what their scope is. And it's really just all about trying to help people meet their own goals. And my strategy is to speak very frankly, but generously. I spend a lot of time on the things that I peer review, and I think that it's always better to speak to people in that I language. I'm having trouble following this, rather than in that sort of almost more cliched English teachery slash and burn approach. So I like to really speak in full sentences. That's one of my strategies I practiced as a writing teacher. Use full sentences to communicate with people, talk to them in how you're perceiving it. Not you need to do this, but I'm having trouble figuring out where this fits, like that. So I guess if I have a strategy for the reviewing, it would be that.
I love that. I love I language. That's so great. Elizabeth, we'll head to you next.
Well, one thing to keep in mind is that some journals are very specific about what they expect reviewers to look for, provide checklists. Like I found one for Portal, in case that's anybody's dream journal to publish in. And they actually talk about what they expect the reviewer to address in their review. When I'm looking at something, when I read it through the first time, because I do read it a couple of times before I submit a review, is I try to figure out, can I understand this? Do I know what they were trying to accomplish? What did they learn from what they did? And then I start looking a little bit more into the details, especially like methodology. Could I repeat this based on what they told me? Are there things that I think they left out? For example, I reviewed an article a few years ago where they didn't explain the criteria they had used to select the journals for their review. And I thought that was a really big oversight that needed to be addressed, because nobody could have followed up and figured that out. I also will say, if you're going to put in a theoretical framework, connect it back later. Don't just have a paragraph that says what your framework is and then never ever mention it again. And then the structure of the article doesn't match the journal norms. And did you answer the research questions that you set out to explore, or did you acknowledge why you couldn't? So those are some of the things that I tend to look for when I'm doing a review.
That's great. Thank you so much. And Merinda.
Sure. So I really appreciate what Katherine said about the writing process and looking at the statements, the I statements in writing. And Elizabeth is correct that every journal has a different expectation for their peer reviewers. They have specific questions, and if those aren't posted on the journal's website, you should ask the editor, because you can see what the peer reviewers will be looking for specifically. But what I'd like to do is tell you a story. So I did a review just last week for a journal that is really heavy on data analysis. And the manuscript that I was reading had fatal flaws in the methodology. So I knew from the very beginning, after reading it once, that I wasn't going to recommend this article for publication. And that always makes me really sad, because I know that the authors did really good work and I've been rejected too. So I know what that sting feels like. So I felt like, as a peer reviewer, the gift that I could give was to help them understand what those fatal flaws were in their methodology. And in this case, it was a mixed methods study. They did a really good job on the quantitative analysis and spent a lot of time on that in the article. Like, the majority was on the quantitative analysis. And that was really demographic information. It really wasn't, in my opinion, the strength or the most interesting part of what their research questions were. The interesting part came in the qualitative data analysis. And unfortunately, the authors, it was pretty clear that they didn't have a good understanding of what qualitative data analysis takes and what the methodologies are behind doing that data analysis. For example, are you doing narrative analysis? Are you doing grounded theory? And so what they had done was asked a few questions and then read those questions from interviews and then found themes, but they couldn't explain why or how they decided on those themes. And the questions themselves had weaknesses in them. So what I did as a peer reviewer is I made a list for them of the things that I felt like were could have been done in a more strong way or like looked at differently. So I did it in a series of ways. I asked questions and I also pointed out some specific flaws, and then I made very specific suggestions, and it was a pretty long list. I sent it to the editor. There's no guarantee that the editor will send that exact list or the review to the authors. It's really up to the editor and the journal. They have different policies. Hopefully I'll get to tell you a story later about something I experienced in that way. But hopefully they get to see that list and then they can rethink about what they did in this study, and maybe they can rework it to submit it somewhere else, or maybe they'll have to use that as a pilot study and then redo it. So that's how I handled that specific situation. I hope that's helpful for some of you to see kind of behind the curtain.
That's great. I love these specific examples and thoughts behind what goes into providing the peer review. I know the handful of times that I've helped with peer reviewing, it's very much been like what Elizabeth said. I had a kind of a list of things I had to look specifically for. And so I found that helpful, but I know that that's not always the case. Excellent. So we'll move on to our third question, which is, what do you wish authors knew about the peer review process? And I'm going to start in the middle. We'll go with Elizabeth to start this time.
I don't think peer review is quite as bad in the library world as it is in some other areas. But some editors and reviewers are petty and mean, and you are going to encounter that, and you can't let it crush you, because they might have been just having a bad day or trying to make themselves feel better. So you're eventually going to get a bad review, and that doesn't mean that you scrap the paper. It just means that maybe you get a second opinion, you don't resubmit to that journal. Maybe you find a better journal to try and get that article. But I think that most peer reviewers, like you've heard today, are doing it because they want to help make papers better, i.e. get them to be publishable. And so, you know, sometimes I will flag bigger issues, but my goal is almost always to get it to that point of being published, and not to make myself feel better by critiquing your work and giving you really nitpicky suggestions.
Excellent. Thank you. Katherine, we'll head to you next.
One thing I wish all authors would remember is that you are not giving them a draft of your work. You're giving them, or what you should be giving, is the very best that you could come up with up to this point. So please do not submit things that have problems with things that are within your control, right? Just double check the citations, make sure all of the spacing is correct. Don't have little things like that that are distracting. Your highest goal as a writer is to keep your reader focused on what you're saying and not start thinking about how you're saying it or how your margins look. All of that's within your control. Okay, you can't control whether they are going to accept your article, but you can prevent them being distracted by things that leap out at you that are just wrong. So make sure you've spelled all of your references names consistently in the citations and throughout. Those are just, take the time to do that. You're not giving them a rough draft. Give them as polished a version of what you have as you can get it. What you're then expected to do once you get their response is to make changes to the content and hopefully not the writing, but then you go ahead and do that. But don't think in terms of you're giving them, you know, some sort of rough draft. I've seen a lot of those, and I'm like, really? Did you? You don't want me getting distracted if I'm the decider about the article. You don't want me getting distracted by silly mistakes and stuff. Mistakes are problems not because the reader cares, but you don't. It hurts you, the writer, because you've now lost their attention. It's like the Wizard of Oz saying, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. I'm sorry, once the man behind the curtain is revealed, they're not looking at the giant speaking firehead. They're looking at how that was created. And that's what you don't want as a writer. So you just do whatever is in your control. Go over it and over it, check every single thing, read it out loud, have someone read it out loud to you, give them a polished draft. That's what I wish.
Wonderful. And Merinda?
So Katherine, it described exactly what I was going to talk about, and I have a story to build on that. So thank you for sharing that background for us, because I want to tell you about a time that I worked on a collaborative project with colleagues several years ago. And one of the co-authors was really insistent about a deadline. They wanted to submit the manuscript by a certain day. It really didn't matter to this person what condition the article was in. And when I asked about it, they said, oh, the peer reviewers and the editor will tell us what we need to fix anyway. So let's just send it and get it in. And I had reviewed for this journal quite a bit. I felt like if that article had come across my desk as the editor, it would not even have gotten past desk review. There were some really significant things missing, like the methodology section was missing. The conclusion was basically written as a restatement of the introduction. There wasn't a discussion about weaknesses in the research or future research ideas that could build on the work. And I faulted myself in part because I hadn't had time to work with my other colleagues enough. They were both tenure track colleagues. And so what I proposed was, let's work on this over the next week or two and get it in a condition where it can be accepted for the journal. And this one colleague pushed back really hard on me and was very upset with me. And we still have kind of an iffy relationship today. It's kind of rocky, and I feel really bad about that. But what I can tell you is that we went in and we redid and worked through that article over the next 2 weeks and submitted it, and it did get accepted with no revisions. So what Katherine is saying is true. You really should be submitting your very best work. It's not the editor's responsibility to come back to you and tell you why your article isn't strong enough for acceptance in that desk review section. And you're wasting everybody's time and the peer reviewers if your manuscript isn't as strong as it can be. So that's one of my own stories. I hope that's helpful.
Definitely agree with all of you that, you should be submitting as final a draft, as polished a draft as you can. I think that's also where you get the best feedback, where you're not missing anything in your mind. You put what you need to put on there. And I think that's so useful. So thank you all for your insights on that. We'll move on to question number 4, which is, what advice would you give yourself when you were starting out in writing and publishing? So if you could just go back to younger you, what would you tell yourself? And Merinda, since I've got you right there, I'll just
Sure.
throw.
Sure. So I just have one thing that I think is the most important thing, and I'll share that, and I'm sure my colleagues will come up with great other suggestions. But for me, the one thing I wish I told myself is to keep a running list of everything that happens while I'm doing research and writing, because I forget things along the way. And it's so important to remember why you made decisions and the questions that occur to you along the way, so that when you get to that writing part of your work, you have everything that has encompassed this experience for you in doing this research. And so now I keep a running list, and sometimes it's just broken thoughts. Sometimes it's highlighting things I wish I had done differently. But I keep a running list of that, and it has saved me for the last few years and many times when I get to the writing process. So that's the most important thing for me.
I love that. All right, Elizabeth, we'll head to you next.
I will say that I think, sorry, I'm gonna kind of break with my colleagues a little bit here and say that when I started out, aimed for submitting an A+ article. And I'm not going to get any comments about how my lit review needed to be more comprehensive, or I was going for my A+. And I think that was limiting in a way, a little overwhelming, because it made it really hard to eventually push it to submit. And so while I agree, don't turn in sloppy work, but turn in work that you think is ready to benefit from somebody else's feedback. But be prepared that you're going to get feedback. Like, that is their job, is to give you feedback. So, it might be that it's, they're confirming something like a gap in your approach, something you overlooked, maybe even some authors who are already writing this field that you somehow managed to leave out of your lit review. Those suggestions are meant kindly. But I would say, do not overpressure yourself to feel like you have a perfect article, because that is not, in my mind, the goal.
That's great. Thank you. And Katherine.
I would say, young KP, toughen up. Just because somebody said something mean to you on your first article submission, that's something being, this is a great idea, poorly executed. I was like, okay, I'm never gonna submit anything ever again because that person hurt my feelings. I mean, it's not about feelings. The peer reviewers are just telling it to you straight. So, I would tell my younger self to stop being so emo about what they were saying and just, try again. I don't know. Do something else, pick another topic, move on.
I like that.
Can I build on that? I have a story.
Oh yeah, totally. Go ahead.
I'd really like to build on that. So I told you earlier that the editors don't have a responsibility, or they approach sharing comments with authors in different ways. And this happened to me several years ago. I received peer review feedback in a format that I'd never seen before. There were 3 reviewers. The first 2 were summarized by the editor, and the third one, and that was positive. And the third reviewer was sent to me with the words verbatim, and it was very negative. It was actually really painful to read. It really stung. One of the things that they told me was that I obviously was being forced to write because I was on the tenure track. That's how bad this article was. And I already had tenure at this point. And so that was really painful to read. But one of the examples that they gave in the review was that the manuscript did not include citations to the person who is the expert in this field, Merinda Hensley. And so that I got a good chuckle out of, but the sting stuck, right? And it took me a little bit to realize that what I had done was I had sent this article to the wrong audience. And so I revised it a bit and I sent it to a journal outside of librarianship, and it got accepted with no revisions. So definitely thinking about these experiences of peer review, when you get them and when you give them, there's time to figure out how that builds you as a better researcher and a better collaborative colleague too.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny that they quoted you back to yours. I've heard stories of that happening, and I agree with Andrea in the comments. Writing, it does feel really personal when you get feedback on your writing, because you put so much of yourself and your time and your effort into these pieces. And I just remember when I submitted my first article and I got feedback from the reviewers. One of them was a simple fix, and then the other one wanted me to do more quantitative data, but I was really writing more of a qualitative piece. And I went to my manager at the time, and I was just like, hey, do I need to do this? Because this would totally change the article. And she told me no. And that was mind blowing, that I don't have to follow necessarily everything that's being said to me. And so I totally get that. So thank you all so much for sharing that. So in lieu of a traditional Q&A, we've pulled 4 of the most common questions that were from the registrations when we asked everybody who registered to send us some questions. And so the first one from that is, how can I become a peer reviewer? So how do you get in with a journal or somewhere to do that? And let's go ahead and we'll start with Katherine.
Well, I started as a peer reviewer by first starting as an author who had been published in the journal. So that I had something published in the journal. Then I met the editor at a conference, and I just basically went up and I said, I'd like to be on the editorial board of this journal. Do you have any openings? And she actually said, I remember you. I remember your article. Okay, well, the next time I have an opening, I'm going to call you. Because I had sort of proved that I could write well. And so I was good with language. And, I told her I'd been an editor and writing teacher for years. But I think just being bold, barge up to somebody at a conference and say, I really want to be on the editorial board. I don't know if that would work necessarily for everyone, but that's how I started.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Or send an email directly to the editors and see, what they're thinking. Yeah, no, that's not a bad first step. All right, so we'll go to Elizabeth next.
Yeah, so I mentioned I responded to a call sent out to the business librarians listserv, and I felt incredibly underqualified to even be volunteering at the time. So it's okay if you don't feel like you have the expertise. I will add that I have been asked because I have written papers for a journal, yes, or I've written a paper about something similar and asked for those reasons. But also some of the bigger publishers kind of have joint systems where if you can go in and indicate, I'm willing to review for these journals, or I have an interest in these areas. I know Elsevier is one of them, and I think they also have like a peer review certificate course that you could go through to figure out, get training if you feel like you need more knowledge before you actually attempt to do that. So I think there's a lot of calls, but I also would definitely second just asking the editor if you know them, if they're looking for more peer reviewers, because they probably are.
That's great. Awesome. And Merinda.
Yeah, I agree with Katherine and Elizabeth. There's calls and you can approach personally, and sometimes there are forms on the website of a journal that you can fill out to volunteer, and then they'll contact you. Thinking about ways to shore up your confidence to be a peer reviewer, because it's true what Elizabeth was getting at is that there's not a lot of training to be a peer reviewer. And so the first peer review that I do for each journal is to remind the editor I'm reviewing for the first time. If there's something better that I could have done, can you provide me with some feedback? And then the second thing that I did that I'll share is that I took a Stats 101 course here at the U of I, because I never took stats before. I was reading articles that were analyzing data that I didn't have experience in. And I wanted to make sure that I was giving good feedback, or that I could even just accept articles to review that had that were heavy on the data analysis section. I can't tell you that I'm an expert in statistics now. I'm really not, but it was a really helpful experience for me to take that course.
That's great. Thank you so much. All right. So what topics do you think are best to write about now? I think this is a common thing we hear about a lot, is people aren't sure what to write about. So, what are some things that you noticed or advice that you might have about what to write about? And we'll go ahead and start with Elizabeth.
As a person who has written an article about a now twice defunct social media platform called Yik Yak, I would say be really cautious about like going full bore into something really trendy at the time, like AI tools or a particular AI tool. If you're going to do something along those lines, think about how you can make it applicable beyond just like this specific tool. But the other advice I would give is actually not specific to a general query about what to write about, but I suggest that if you're not sure what to write about, invite a colleague or two to a cup of coffee and ask them, what do you think I know more about than anybody else in the library? Because sometimes I know I have trouble seeing what I'm good at or recognizing my own expertise. And hearing from somebody else, oh, you are really amazing at outreach. Could you, talk about your outreach opportunities or your strategies and turn that into an article? Can really help you get an idea about something that you will both enjoy writing about and hopefully be good at writing about.
That's great. Awesome. And we'll move on to Katherine.
I'm now the library director at a technical college. So what I actually am interested in terms of research reading is ways that show me how libraries can be directly relevant to student success, especially on the lower levels, like community colleges, technical colleges, two-year degree programs. It's a daily struggle here for me to remind my colleagues of the library's relevance to those things. I had a administrator just come in recently and say to a group of prospective students and their parents that no one reads books anymore because everything's online. And I'm like banging my head on my desk. I would really like to see things that talk about the library's role in the lives of students. Libraries have expanded their roles. They're not just all about research help. So the role of libraries in the kind of social and emotional and psychological lives of students on a campus, I would really like to see something. I'm only saying what topics would be of interest to me. I have no idea what would be good in terms of, the whole field, but I would find those things really helpful, just doing my job as a library director.
I think that's part of it, Katherine, is a lot of these journals, they're trying to find things that are useful. And especially areas of student success have been so popular lately, anything related to that. And I'm starting to see more about things like community colleges and things like that. So yeah, for sure. And Merinda.
Yeah, sure. So I think it's tempting to try to find something that is really current and popular. I think we also get pressure from the language in our tenure track documentation. If you're in that kind of position, to write on something that's unique, that's new, that no one else has written about, that is a lot of pressure. What I would tell you is to write about something that you're really interested in, something that's related to your job. But I also have colleagues who write in their disciplines. I have a colleague in history who is a historian, and she writes in that area. And if you're not interested in what you're writing, it's going to be a slog. It's hard enough to do research and to do writing without engaging in something that really drives you. So read a lot from journals and see what's coming out and where your interests lie, and start digging into areas that really drive you. That would be my advice.
I love that. I love that so much. And I think it's hard too. For me, it's the timeline of things that is hard, because I'll be like, I really want to write something. And then, it's like a year or even two before it comes out. It's an article can take a while with all the review and everything. And heaven forbid, it's a book or a book chapter. Then it's even longer. And so I was shocked. I know I put together a book a couple of years ago, and shortly after I put it out, within the next 2 years, there were two more books on very similar topics that were coming out, and I had no idea. And so, yeah, sometimes I think there's just trends that pop up, and it's hard to know in advance, because who knows how long people have been working on things and when they're going to eventually see the light of day. So, yeah, lots of things with that. All right, so our next question is, what are some common mistakes you see in submissions? And start with Merinda this time.
Sure. So you got to remember that by the time the reviewers are asked to look at your manuscript, it's already made it past desk review. So that means that the editor sees strengths in that manuscript that could be published in their journal. If it doesn't fit the scope of the journal, it would have already been rejected. So the mistakes that I see oftentimes are weaknesses in arguments or in data analysis. And so I tend to review articles that are social sciences, research-based, not as much as the theoretical, although I love theoretical writing, and I teach in theoretical areas, but the mistakes that I'm seeing are things about methodology, missing things in the analysis, forgetting to talk about the weaknesses or why something worked in a specific way. So those are the things that I see the most. I'm not really worried, honestly, about writing style as much or copy editing. The editor and the copy editors are going to get to that. So I don't let that bother me too much. I'm really looking at the context of the article.
For sure, that's great. Let's head over to Katherine.
Well, I would say that I'm always more focused on the writing aspect. So I would say that the biggest common mistake I see is this presumed academic voice, where it's really detached and it's very stilted. Use plain English. Just stop thinking you have to sound like Mr. Spock when you're writing. Just make sure your writing flows, so that, kind of what I said earlier, the person reading it doesn't get distracted by your style. Okay. Everyone tends to write more stiltedly when they're trying so hard to follow rules they think are rules, like I can't use I in anything I write for college. I can't end a sentence with a preposition. Those are silly rules. The only rule should be, is my audience listening to what I'm saying and not getting distracted by how I'm saying it? That's the only rule I would really like to see people follow. So I wouldn't say that's necessarily a mistake. It's more of a misunderstanding about how you need to present yourself, what your professional writing voice should be. Talk more like a normal person. Go ahead and say we instead of the authors of this study, unless for some reason the editors or the peer reviewers tell you can't say that. Just start off trying that. I mean, always try to use fewer words to say what you mean. The more words you can sort of shave out, the better. I mean, it's like walking through knee-high grass as opposed to walking across a golf green. You want to make it as easy as possible to move along. So just always, I'm not saying less is more in terms of the content, but the fewer words you can use to say the same meaning, the better your prose will be.
Awesome. Thank you. And Elizabeth.
So funnily enough, I actually, trying to write in my authentic voice, once got a note from my peer reviewer saying that hodgepodge was not enough of an academic word and I had to remove it and use something better. But I still do think that you should try to write more plainly. In fact, if you haven't seen plainlanguage.gov and reviewed it, I definitely recommend taking a look at that and thinking about that when you're approaching academic writing, to make sure you're not making it beyond what your audience can understand. One other thing that I definitely would recommend is the mistake that I see sometimes is submitting to the wrong journal, and be willing to acknowledge that mistake and pull the article and send it somewhere else. So if you get a bad peer review, make sure you're reading about the aims and scope, and are they looking for theoretical articles or are they looking for more practical articles? What are their page limit or word limits? I confess I tried to submit something kind of outside of my discipline, and they came back with such extensive rewrites that I was just like, this is not worth it. And I submitted it to another journal. If you're not as confident, I would also suggest, I see in the chat that there's a new journal at Syracuse coming out. I also have started by submitting to Virginia Libraries, which is a peer review journal for my state library association. So you don't have to aim for the top journal in the field. In fact, I recommend you don't. Think about, I'm a sports fan, think about like the minor leagues. You don't have to aim to be a major leaguer from day one. You can start by working and submitting to a smaller journal first, hopefully having a better experience and working your way up. Another thing I would say is don't be afraid to acknowledge things that you belatedly realized you should have done differently in your limitations or future research section, because I really would like to know what didn't go the way you expected, so that if I'm trying to replicate this at my own institution, I don't make your mistakes. We did this, we found this in an article, we had grouped disciplines in a way that really made it hard to generalize. And then we found this article that had actually addressed this problem. And we realized, oh, that is what we should have done. So I know it can be very hard, especially when you're writing, to think, oh, this didn't go the way I expected. If I acknowledge this, the editors or peer reviewers are gonna be like, oh, you are terrible. You completely messed everything up. I'm not gonna accept the article. I think we need to be better at acknowledging maybe where things didn't go as we expect and putting them in. And one last tip that is not specifically related to peer review, it is way further in the process, but if you are doing a survey, and especially if you are gathering qualitative responses to that survey, think very carefully about how many questions you are including, because coding all of those responses takes so much time, and it's really hard to understand and get trends. So have somebody else look at the survey, say, yes, I'm tired of answering questions and I'm only halfway through. Or I don't understand the difference between why something is important and something is critical and why you want me to give an explanation of both. Really have somebody look at your questions before you do it, just to make your life, when it comes to writing, so much easier.
These are all great points. Thank you all so much for sharing those. All right, and we've got one last question from our registrations that we're going to choose today, and that is, to what extent should authors respond to peer review comments on their first draft? And I know we've talked about that a little bit so far, but feel free to share some of your own experiences with this as well. And so we'll go ahead and start with Katherine.
I got a really nice message from people that I commented on their draft, and they thanked me. They said that, that it would make their work better. And that meant a lot to me, because often when you comment on people's writing, they never come back and say, thank you for pointing out everything that I didn't do perfectly the first time. But like I think Elizabeth was saying, it's not, it's the wrong goal to submit something perfect. It should be the best that you can get it, but with the understanding that your next level is going to be responding to your reviewers and your editors. So I always really try to emphasize with everybody who I'm helping with writing, whether it's students or colleagues, no published thing ever got there by just one person's eyes and brain, right? Good writing always has multiple eyes on it, multiple ears on it, and it goes through an evolution process. So I do think it is helpful for me as a reviewer for people to respond and say, either I didn't understand what you meant by your comment, or I appreciate your comments, you know, and that is going to help me. I don't think it's helpful to say, what do you know? What gives you the right to comment on my work, kind of thing. As I actually had a student who said that to me once, and I very sarcastically said the letters M.A. after my name. So anyway, authors, if you have questions, I think that definitely you should say, I appreciate your always couch it in sort of like, I see that you're trying to help me. Could you please clarify what you meant by this? I also think it's nice to say thank you. That came out of nowhere. And after doing this for years and years and years, I think that's the first time anyone ever took the time to write and say, thank you for doing that. We really appreciate that you took the time to help us. So, because I mean, it's all volunteer stuff. You know, you don't, it's just, I'm not being paid per article that I peer review, you know.
We'll head over to Merinda.
So once again, I have a story for you. So I did a recent review for a journal outside of librarianship, and it was a two-part review. I didn't know it was going to come back to me, but the first review that I did, I pointed out several weaknesses in the writing, but I thought that the authors had the data. They had just chosen not to include it in their manuscript for whatever reason. Maybe they were worried about word limit or something. So I pointed out some areas where they could take out some text and add in some contextualization that would make the article much stronger. I sent it to the editor, and then a couple of months later, I think it was about 3 months later, I got back and a request to review this article again that had been revised. And what I got was the first draft and then the revised draft. I had all of the editor and other reviewer comments to look at, and the authors and many journals expect this now, for you to take all of the comments from the reviewers and point out where you addressed that in your revisions, what page or what line it's on. Or if you don't agree with those comments, and you can explain why you don't agree with those comments. And the editor has the choice in the end to accept that or not. Oftentimes, I think they lean with the author. They don't come back to the author and say, oh no, the reviewer was right, you have to change this. In my experience, that doesn't happen very often. So what I did was I went through those revisions and made sure that they had addressed everything and reread the article. And then my review back was basically 2 lines saying, this is great. They addressed everything. It's ready to be accepted. I don't think there needs to be any revisions. That was a great experience for me reviewing. It was rewarding.
Wonderful. Awesome. And Elizabeth.
So just to make it super explicitly clear, many journals give reviewers the option to check a box to say, are you willing to review a revision of this work? So keep that in mind, that it is quite possible that the same person will get a second submission. And therefore, if you don't address the points that they've made, they might not view the revision very favorably. But all that is to say is, you, like Merinda said, you don't have to change something. I've had authors point out, this was not within the scope of my study, so no, I cannot add this conclusion. And I respect that. But I did kind of wonder, like Merinda, did you have this information and you just didn't include it here for some reason? Because I think it would make it stronger if you were able to make this connection. So yes, you are always able to turn it down, but do know that somebody might a peer reviewer might be seeing that same article again if they have offered to do it. Usually, if I recommend an article either for a major or minor revision, I will agree to read a revision of it to see if it gets better, because I kind of like to see what happens, right? You know, does it get better? Usually I will not agree to read a revision if I recommend rejecting it, which usually is just because it doesn't meet the journal scope for some reason, or else there's a fatal methodological flaw. Because then I feel like it benefits more from a fresh pair of eyes, and there's nothing that I could add to the journal editor by reviewing it again.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for all of that. I know we're getting close to our hour time, and we had some excellent questions in the Q&A, and I saw that Amanda was going through and putting in some answers there. I think what we'll do, panelists, if you're okay with it, is maybe we'll send you all some of the questions, and when we send out the recording and some of the resources that have been shared today, maybe we'll share some of that feedback as well. And who knows, maybe this will show up. I think the response to this session today was so good that we're for sure going to do some future panelist opportunities. So keep an eye out for those. But really just thank you so much to our panelists for joining us today. For those of you in the audience, feel free, our link is there on the website to view more about the Library Writing Cooperative and how you can get involved. Just two quick announcements with that. National Article Writing Month is coming up next month. So if you want to join a supportive community to work on an article, feel free to join us for National Article Writing Month. You can participate in as much or as few of the opportunities. You can just write on your own if you would like to. And if any of you are going to the American Library Association conference in a couple of weeks, I am presenting a poster on behalf of all four of us. So you can come visit us, and we do have these Nora the Narwhal temporary tattoos that we'll be giving out at the conference. So fun swag. But yeah, feel free to check us out. Feel free to let us know if you have any other questions, drop them in the chat or the Q&A. I'll just kind of hang out here for a minute to give everybody a chance to type those in if you have them. And again, thank you all so much for coming today.